Today's episode of the iMore Show is brought to you by Audible. Go to audiblepodcast.com/iMore to get your free audiobook download. It's Thursday, December 19, 2013, and right now we're going to review iOS 7. This is the iMore Show. So welcome to the iMore Show. If you are joining us for the first time, this is our weekly podcast where we get together and talk all things Apple. I'd like to thank you for joining us. We do this every Thursday afternoon at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, which is something UTMS, which I'm not smart enough to figure out. But joining me, as usual, is the managing editor of iMore and the executive editor of loopinsight.com, The Loop. And I think he has several empirical titles of, probably Coruscant origins. How are you, Peter?
Good. How are you, Renee?
Very well, thank you. Also joining us from way across the pond in an island that he has told me is far bigger than I possibly could have imagined, our very own Richard Devine. How are you, Richard?
I'm very well, Renee. How is everybody?
I am getting ready to go over to the Apple Store at around midnight and wait in the freezing cold Quebec evening for an iPhone 5S. How about you, Richard?
I won't be waiting in the freezing cold in Quebec, but I will be waiting in the freezing cold in Yorkshire. So it's kind of the same, but maybe with less chance of snow.
And Peter, you're also in the colonies?
Yes, I am in the colonies, and it will be freezing cold here at night as well. Although my evening plans still remain to be seen. I fully intend to pick up an iPhone 5S, but where and at what time, I'm not quite sure yet.
It's going to be a Peter Sellers movie, isn't it?
It really will be, definitely.
So we're going to start. We're not going to talk about the iPhone 5S or the iPhone 5C this week because they're about to go on sale, and we'd rather have them in our hands when we, get into them. But we are going to talk about iOS 7 because that launched yesterday, and we have posted not only a complete 14,000-word review with like 8 videos or something. It is way bigger than any review has any right to be. We've also posted. I think the count yesterday, Peter, was like 48 articles on iOS 7.
Yeah, not too bad for a single day's work.
No, yeah, we definitely earned our adult beverages last night. So we've talked about the design to death because Apple showed off the design. That was one of the first things and one of the only things we really were allowed to talk about. So I want to get sort of into the usage of it. And one of the biggest changes in the usage, for me at least, has been all the gestures. For example, you can peek at your timestamps in the Messages app or quickly gesture back to your inbox in Mail. You can gesture backwards and forwards in your history in Safari. Richard, you've played with BlackBerry devices that have had gesture support for a long time. How does the iOS 7 gesture stack up for you?
It's pretty good. It's the swiping left and right. It kind of feels natural for like flicking through Safari and going back in your inbox. There's nothing radical. There's no sort of multi-finger pinches and swipes. It's just you've got your phone in one hand, swipe right, swipe left, bit of up and down, and it goes really well with that one-handed approach that Apple always pushes, that you can use the iPhone comfortably with one hand, and the new gestures just take that a little bit further and make it just a little bit more sort of comfortable to use without constantly going to the top and bottom of the phone.
That's typically Apple to me, Peter, because a lot of times people like to talk about the solutions they want instead of the problems they have, and Apple will listen and say, oh, you say you want persistent multitasking, but what you really want is to be able to listen to Pandora while you surf the web. And now it's like, oh, you say you want a bigger phone, and I'm sure there's lots of people who legitimately want a larger screen, but for other people the answer is they want bigger text, or they want to be able to see more of their content. So in iOS 7 you have Text Kit, which means that you can dynamically resize fonts, and you have deference, so things like the Safari stuff disappears, and you have those gestures so that you can just use it one-handed. Do you think there's a room for both, or is Apple doing it completely the right way?
I definitely think that there's room for both. If there's one thing that Samsung and other Android handset makers have proven, and even Lumia with its Windows phones, is that there are different flavors of smartphone for everyone. I don't think Apple is ever going to, and I don't think that they're not interested now in making a single solution that's right for everybody. But I think that Apple will contend that their solution is the best one to solve these particular problems. And that's that's really where they excel. They don't necessarily get into combat with other manufacturers over the spec of their machines, for example. That really doesn't carry a lot of meaning. So the size of the screen is really kind of irrelevant. The question is, how well do you use it? You can have a big screen on a phone if the operating system and the applications that run on it are kludgy and difficult to use. It's going to be a diminished user experience, no matter if it's a 4-inch phone or a 7-inch phone. Apple, to its credit, recognizes this and really tries to get the design out of the way of the task at hand.
So one of the things that did bother me about gestures, and I've been using gestures on a phone since I think WebOS was the first time where I used them consistently. And the thing with gestures for me is that they have to be consistent or I'm too stupid to remember them. So if I can always gesture right and left, then it's easy. I just always gesture right and left, which is why I like the navigation gestures on the iPad. 4-finger swipe here, 4-finger swipe everywhere. The ones on iOS 7 are a little different though. For example, in Safari, you gesture right and left to go forwards and backwards through history. But in Mail and Messages, going one way takes you back through a hierarchy, and going the other way does the swipe to delete gesture, which is destructive. And then in other apps where the same thing, like for example in Notification Center, you can now swipe left and right between the tabs. But other apps that have tabs, you can't swipe left or right. And Richard, I'm just wondering if gestures are still a work in progress for Apple, and if that consistency might be addressed, and whether it bothers you that it's not as consistent yet, or if it's just a Renee thing.
I think you've pretty much hit the nail on the head. It does feel like it's a work in progress. It's not, as you mentioned, it's not everywhere. But I think one of the things that's going to make it a lot easier on the end users is gestures have been implemented in a lot of third-party apps for some time now. And the Mailbox, for example, there's a lot of swiping in there to do various different actions. A lot of email clients and things like that. So it's not. While it's maybe something new and something that Apple are kind of still working on because of the third-party implementation, we're kind of used to doing these swipes across the screen just through having used other things. So I don't think it's not unnatural. It's perhaps just a little bit frustrating if you're expecting to be able to swipe and you can't.
Yeah, it's swipus interruptus. Peter, have you tried? I got used to Notification Center easily in iOS 5, and Control Center was a little more difficult because a lot of phones prior to the iPhone, when you swiped up, you'd get to multitasking. And with the iPhone, you swipe up and you get to Control Center. But I like a lot of the functionality they built into Control Center, even if it's not customizable yet.
It's been a very natural transition for me. I like it. As far as the consistency across the interface, well, there is a lot of consistency, but what is it that Ralph Waldo Emerson said about the foolish consistency being the hobgoblin of little minds? I don't think that everything has to work exactly the same in order for you to use it effectively. I haven't had any trouble at all adapting between iOS 6 and iOS 7 to the new gestures to do things. I probably had 5 minutes of confusion where I was like, wait a minute, what is this? How does this work? After that, it became very natural. And one thing that I think is really cool about how Apple has handled gestures in iOS 7 is that they have definitely taken into account the way that people use their phones, which is one-handed with their thumb. The stuff that you do on the phone doesn't require you to sit there and grab it with one hand and kind of twist your fingers into a Vulcan nerve pinch in the other to get it to do things. Everything that you can do so easily on the iPhone, you can do just by swiping your thumb, and that is a real tribute to Apple's designers.
All right, so let's sort of work our way from outside in. Siri, which was introduced with the iPhone 4S and improved with the iPhone 5 and iOS 6, has gotten another improvement. It didn't get so many new features as it kind of got rounded out, but one of the biggest new features is Siri can now access your settings. For example, you can say, Siri, turn on or off Bluetooth, turn on or off airplane mode. You can also access Wikipedia, and you can access Bing, including Bing image search. I like Siri, Richard. I use it all the time. I use it to dictate posts while I'm driving, because you can't type, and I get too lazy to type even when I'm not driving, and I just want to be able to blurt out text quickly. Siri has also come out of beta with iOS 7. There's no longer a big beta label on it. You've used Siri, you've used Google Now, you've used the different versions on Nokia and BlackBerry phones. How's Siri working for you in iOS 7?
I'd say generally a lot better than it has been in the past. I'm not a whole generally. I'm not a big fan of the of voice everything. It's just something that doesn't come very naturally to me, and I'm just not the sort. I don't think I'm the right target market for any of them. But that said, some of the new stuff they've added is really, really good. Being able to turn on airplane mode just by opening Siri and saying turn on airplane mode, things like that I could get behind. Kind of web searches and especially Bing, it's probably not gonna make me want to use it anymore. But it's a noticeable improvement, and it's good that it does finally seem to be out of beta.
Peter, it's your experience.
Well, the thing that I noticed right off the bat is that you can, and of course Apple had talked about this previously, so it's no big surprise, but you can now change the gender of Siri if you live in the U.S. or Canada. Other countries are not quite so lucky, but if you're here in the States or up in Canada, outside of French Canada, and you're using it in French, you can swap genders. So if you don't like Siri being a girl, you can make Siri a boy now. It's a lot of fun. Siri for me has always been something kind of on the peripheral of usefulness to me. And part of that is because Siri is so dependent on network connectivity in order to work. I really wish that Apple could encapsulate the power of Siri down to something that was downloadable into the phone, because the problem that I've got is, unfortunately, the carrier that I go with has kind of spotty coverage around here. So a lot of times Siri can't do anything for me because they can't move enough packets over the network to get the information the phone needs in order to do that. So, Siri kind of an edge case for me, but it's still fun, and it's nice to see Siri have access to new content thanks to the new partner relationships that Apple has. All told, Siri is a cornerstone technology of iOS. It's something that we are going to see in every iOS product from here on out.
Are you concerned? I mean, there was some concern on the internet. The internet had a mini crisis last night and this morning when people found out that just like you could in previous versions of iOS, you could access Siri even when the phone was locked. And because of Control Center and because of Siri, you can now even use it to turn off airplane mode and conceivably stop people from tracking phones after they were stolen. Is that a big concern to you, Peter, or is that just how it works and you can turn it off if you don't want it?
I think it's more of a how it works, and you can turn it off if you don't want it. Look, if somebody steals your phone, they're going to figure out a way to steal your phone, okay? The fingerprint technology in the iPhone 5S and Find My Phone notwithstanding, a determined thief is going to figure out a way around anything that you've got on the system. I don't see having Siri activation and being able to turn on airplane mode as something that's going to deter any criminal from stealing your stuff.
Yeah, I think Apple's just trying to make you a minimally viable target. They introduce things like activation lock and a bunch of other technologies that make the iPhone less attractive, or not less attractive, they make it harder to deal with if you steal it. So they're probably hoping that someone will steal another phone. But yeah, if you want to, and we have an article up and there'll be a link in the show notes, you can turn off all access, you can ramp up privacy, you can ramp up security. It'll make your phone a lot less convenient because as much as iOS 7 has new security features, it has a lot of new convenience features, but that's something every individual owner is going to have to weigh for themselves and come to an adult decision about. I want to just go back quickly to something you said, Richard, about, actually you were mentioning, Peter, about the localized Siri. Now, Richard, that exists on Google Now. Google Now, and most famously, the Moto X has a dedicated chip for natural language and context parsing, and I forget which version of Android, 4.1 or 4.2 or something, put Google Now local on the device for voice parsing. Apple hasn't done it. Unlike Google, Apple doesn't own the technology. They are working on voice, but they license stuff from Nuance. Is that a deal breaker for you? Is that something Apple absolutely has to address in the near future?
Possibly. I mean, I don't think it spoils the experience, but then for me, I'm always connected to some form of data. So I think the onboard technology, if nothing else, it takes an extra variable out of the equation. So you don't have to rely on having good data to be able to do something, to be able to set reminders, and the way that Google's implementing the voice search is pretty good. Again, I don't think it's there yet, but I wouldn't say that Apple's necessarily playing catch up. I just think that there is a difference. I think they're both going in different directions at the moment. Like say, Google owns the technology, so it's a little bit easier for them to implement it on their devices. But I can see a bright future in it. I'm still not convinced it'll be the future for me, but I think a lot of people will really like it, and the Moto X in particular it's a really good implementation.
Google now will also do predictive assistance, which Apple doesn't really do that much of in Siri. Google now will say, oh, your plane is coming up, or your meeting is coming up, the traffic has changed, you should do this or that. It won't wait for you to ask it a question. It'll actually throw notifications your way. I would love to see Siri do that, but we're getting a little bit of that in the notification center. Notification center has been improved, and it has this new Today view. And while it's arguably not as glanceable as it used to be because it got rid of a lot of the graphics, it's got more text. And one of those text fields can be, for example, if you were to leave for home now, it would take you 13 minutes because of traffic. Is that more to your liking, Richard, because it's not voice control, but it's just presented there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's those sort of things are what I use the most from Google now. In a previous life, I did a lot of driving and a lot of traveling, and that having that information in my calendar, it being able to predict where I was going to, when I was going to need to leave, what time I'd need to be hitting the road, traffic. It's those kind of things are more important to me than being able to turn on airplane mode with my voice. But it is all about the predictive stuff. It's some people kind of think it's creepy, but I mean, when you use it on an Android device, and it becomes second nature once you've opted in, and it starts finding out what your routines and pulling in everything that you possibly want it to. It's indispensable, and it's a shame that we can get a taste, especially from the Google point. It's a shame we can't sort of combine the two and have more of that more up front. But I mean, the Today views it's a step in the right direction towards that sort of thing. It's all about the prediction for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, what we've talked about before is I would love to be able to use Spotlight Search to query the Siri engine. If I'm sitting at a dinner table and I can't pick up my phone and say, Jamie Dodger and Chip Batty, now! I would like to be able to tap it in and still get the results. But the other thing that you're getting on OS X Mavericks that we're not getting on iOS is actionable notifications. Again, something WebOS had a little bit of, Android has had for a year or so now. I would really love Notification Center and notifications in general when it shows me the text message to let me quickly reply and send it back without changing apps.
Yeah, that's going to be such a huge productivity improvement in Mavericks, and I'm really looking forward to it. Now, it's something that in Mavericks, because, I mean, in OS X, because, OS X is a little bit more extensible than iOS is, that you've been able to work around with third-party utilities and so on. But it is a big thing, and it just goes to show you that Apple doesn't necessarily. A lot of people have said that iOS and OS X are headed for an inevitable convergence, a singularity, and Apple's only going to develop one operating system. I don't see that happening. They have very different ideas about how people use computers versus using their mobile devices, and that's readily apparent in the latest builds of these operating systems, respectively.
Yeah, it's sort of like there's cars and there are motorcycles, but very few people own a T-Rex.
That's right.
So, Control Center, just before we leave the subject of the lock screen and all the stuff on it, I like it. I find the toggles very useful. I don't use them. I just leave my stuff on. I've never had a problem leaving my stuff on, so I don't feel the obsessive need to change them. The media controls are great. They're very convenient. I like them better than them being buried in the fast app switcher. The icons on the bottom are a bit unwieldy to me, though, because depending on who you are, those might not be very frequently used apps. Like, I very seldom use a calculator, so I might prefer, for example, to have a Twitter app there or something else. Richard, I like the way Control Center is going, and I really hope that it becomes customizable in the future.
I agree, completely agree. I do like the fact that they've included a flashlight, because how many of us actually have had to go and download a flashlight app for so many years just for the odd occasion that you need to use it. So I mean, it's a fantastic idea. I love Control Center. I use it probably more than anything else in iOS, and I'm constantly listening to music on my iPhone. So being able to flick up and get the media controls is much better for me. But I do really hope it's customizable in the future, because I kind of like having the camera there and the flashlight. But alarm clock and sorry, the calculator, yeah, the alarm clock and the calculator. I don't use them so much. I have one alarm set all the time, so I'd like to be able to replace those.
iFuelin in the chat room is saying that all pediatricians rejoice about the calculator, seriously. And I know a lot of people use it. A lot of people love it for tips. There's all sorts of reasons to have it. I just figure that, and tell me if I'm wrong, Peter, different people will, like, for example, I love that I can tap the title of a track in Control Center and go to the music app, but if I'm using the podcasting app, it'll take me there instead. I just wish more of that was available in different areas of Control Center.
I'm sure it will be, but this is a brand new technology and a brand new version of the operating system. It's going to take a while for Apple to figure out how best to leverage it. So, I can be patient. I'm right with Richard, though. When I saw the flashlight icon pop up in the Control Center, I thought that was great because, what it lets you do is two actions and, well, I guess three technically, and you're using a flashlight. So if you're in the dark but you've got your iPhone in your hand, you hit the home button to bring the screen to life. You swipe up to activate Control Center, and then you hit the flashlight button. That's great. If you're stumbling home in the dark and you forgot to turn the lights on before you left and you got to get your key in the door, it's now easier than ever to see in the dark. That's kind of a nice feature. It's a very thoughtful one. As far as the music app is concerned, yeah, I love the way the Control Center handles that connectivity, and it's also nice to be able to, the trumped up security issues with airplane mode accessible from the Control Center aside. It's really nice to be able to do things like turn Bluetooth on and off, turn airplane mode on and off, Wi-Fi. DND, you can turn on Do Not Disturb, and you can lock orientation from there as well.
I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that they're all very smart additions, but there's room for improvement, to be sure.
Curse your reasonableness, Peter Cohen, in reminding me that things take time and and resources are limited. Also, thank you, Craig Johnson, for pointing out it's a stopwatch icon, not a clock icon, because I need that for wind sprints far more than I did need to know to take a pizza out the oven. We're going to take a break for a second and just thank our sponsor, Audible. You can go to audiblepodcast.com/iMore and get a free audiobook download. Why do you want to do this? Well, why wouldn't you want to do this? Audible is fantastic. I'm about to go out and line up for an Apple iPhone 5S. I will be standing in line for approximately 8 hours. Those could be tedious, excruciating hours, but they won't be because I have got a bunch of great books on Audible, and I am going to listen to them while I am waiting. I'm not sure exactly which book I'm going to listen to yet, and that's the point. I don't have to decide in advance. I can just go, I can buy several books that I have not read before, even old favorites of mine that I just want to use for comfort and enjoyment, and I can listen to them. I just recently downloaded books I read as a child, David Eddings' Belgariad series, 5 books, Pawn and the Prophecy, all the way to Enchanter's Endgame. Hours and hours of nostalgia that I can enjoy right on my iPhone. All you do is buy the books. They are added to your library. You download the app. You put it on your iPhone or iPad or iPod Touch. And then you can just download books whenever you want to listen to them right from your library. Nothing could be easier. Whether you are commuting to work, I used to commute to work an hour and a half each way. It was excruciating, but I had Audible and I managed to get through a lot and I managed to learn a lot. I used to also travel. Well, I still do. I travel frequently, and there's nothing better on a plane than resting your eyes and listening to a great story. I have written 100,000 words just this month for iMore already. My eyes are tired. I cannot read for enjoyment anymore. So what do? I listen. I let my ears get some stimulation. I let my brain function, and I let my eyes rest. I really cannot recommend Audible enough. They are a fantastic service. They make great apps for iOS, incredibly convenient. You can have everything from biographies to the latest in fiction to sci-fi to fantasy and everything in between right on your iPhone, right on your iPad. Go to audiblepodcast.com/iMore. Try it out. Absolutely no risk. Get a great book, a free credit. Test it, see if you love it, and if you love it as much as I do, sign up right then and right there. You will not regret it. Thanks. Moving on, multitasking. Multitasking has been substantially improved in iOS 7. It's my understanding that they've been working on this for a long time, and it really does show. The original iPhone, people forget this, but it was amazing at multitasking. If you had a Trio or something, my old Trio would crash when I got a phone call, crash when I made a phone call, crash when I launched an app. Steve Jobs in 2007 showed an iPhone playing music, taking a phone call, leaving the phone call, checking email, checking a website, returning an email, going back to the phone call, turning it off, and music fading back. They just never made that available to third-party apps until iOS 4, and then they made it incredibly limited because it turns out, unimpeded preemptive multitasking drains battery life. Who knew? But it was frustrating to people because you could play Pandora and surf the web or do turn by turn, but for example, you couldn't have a persistent internet connection or you couldn't download your save for later reading list in the background. So it meant you'd get a tweet, you'd see the notification, you'd go to Twitter, and then you'd have to wait for the message to download. Now, not only do they have a bunch of new APIs that effectively make every app a multitasking app, but they've invented this thing which is basically just-in-time multitasking. And Richard, why I think this is so clever is I don't really care if the app is open all the time. All I care about is that it's updated before I get there. And with perception being reality, I can't tell the difference. So the idea that instead of pinging the network all the time, it's only pinging it even a few seconds before I get there, to me is brilliant.
Absolutely. To 90% of iPhone owners, it's not what it does, it's how it does it. And people can nerd out about, oh, well, it's not true multitasking or whatever, but at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. It's perception. It doesn't matter what it does behind the scenes. All that matters is that my stuff is there when I want it, and that's basically it. There's no need to overcomplicate it. And I think what they're doing is it's a really fantastic method. And it looks brilliant as well. When you open up all the multitasking window and just being able to scroll through and swipe up to get rid of stuff, it's such a vast improvement on the old iOS 6 and before way of doing things. It's really, really nice.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to the interface in a second, but because I want your opinion on that for sure. But Peter, it's sort of like Mavericks in a way in that it does a lot of opportunistic coalescence. So if the GPS is firing up, any app that needs GPS will be given access. If you turn on your phone, because the screen is lighting up and the processor is turning on, any app that requires a beef bit of processor is just funneled in there. If a developer sends a notification, even an invisible, inaudible one, it'll alert the app to download. So functionally, for people like us, it means that when we go to our app, if there's a new issue of a magazine or a new episode of something, it's there before we get there. And I think that's what makes a huge difference.
Well, it comes back to Apple answering the need that we have, not the request that we've made. I mean, as long as it does what I want it to do, I don't give a damn how it gets there. I just want the end result the same.
So the interface, Richard mentioned it. Originally, Apple prototyped some things that kind of looked like Expose, and BlackBerry 10 ended up using something very similar to it. But then when it came for release in iOS 4, they had this little fast app switcher, which I never really liked because it just didn't seem like the right answer. Originally, Safari had this, actually it still has this page. It just lost it, but up until this version, it had this pages screen where you'd press the tab button, the page would shrink down, you could quickly leaf through them, and Palm was brilliant enough to see that is the best metaphor for a lot of things, and they made WebOS cards, and then Apple didn't take that back. They let Palm have it, and now finally they've brought that home, and I like it even better because they put the icon at the bottom of the thumbnail. Now, it doesn't update live the way I believe WebOS did. I know the BlackBerry Playbook did for sure, but it gives you a representation of the page. One white page could look the same, but Richard, it's got the little icon at the bottom, and that to me, I might recognize the page, but I'm absolutely going to recognize the icon.
Absolutely, it looks how we would all want it to look. I mean, those of us that haven't really used WebOS have seen the cards interface and kind of fawned over it for years, and it's kind of, for me anyway, it's just kind of the best way that they could have done it. I'm with you. I didn't really like the fast app switcher. It just felt like I was going back to the home screen and and just swiping through the apps and just, I might as well have just closed everything and gone back to it as usual. But now you've got the little representation. You can kind of see what you were doing before, and you can just scroll through it, swipe up, get rid of stuff that you don't want. It just works so nicely. You can just pick it up, open it up, and just go through your stuff and see what you were doing. It's fantastic. It really is. I really, really like it. I like it a lot.
Peter, you want to? I mean, I almost never quit apps, and iOS is not designed for. We get this question all the time: how do I quit all apps? And iOS is not designed for you to quit all apps. If you quit apps, you lose all the multitasking. They can't update their content. They can't do anything because you've quit them. Yet there's people who always ask, how can I quit all apps? And geniuses, which is not always a good thing, will show people how to do it because they don't want to be bothered troubleshooting rogue processes with them. So this whole urban legend about quitting all your apps has gone through. You can, as Richard said, grab a card and flip it up, but I don't know how to tell people to quit doing that.
Well, it's like all urban legends. There's a grain of truth in there someplace, right? The urban legend started because the idea was that if you quit apps, you would save on your battery life. You don't necessarily, as long as the app is well behaved. Where it does come in handy is if you've got, as you said, a rogue process. I installed this application called Carat, C-A-R-A-T. On my app. It's a free download from the App Store that actually measures what kind of comparative battery life these apps are using. And it told me the other day, hey, your Facebook app, if you get rid of your Facebook app, it's going to save you 2 hours of battery life. 2 hours of battery life.
Richard and I got rid of Facebook. That's neither here nor there.
Yeah, I just signed out of Facebook and left it. That
Right,
saved
exactly.
about 10 years of my life.
That was my solution. It wasn't to get rid of my Facebook account altogether. That's sort of the sledgehammer and fly philosophy. But in my case, I simply quit out of the app, and if I need and got rid of it off my phone altogether, if it's going to be that much of a peg, and I'll use the web interface if I have to. It's more full featured than the iOS app anyway. But point being, that's the kernel of truth. If you've got an app that's a rogue process, or if you've got an app that's doing location finding that you didn't know about, or what have you, these things can wreak hell on your battery life. So it comes in handy for that. But yeah, I mean, people are probably going to be under the mistaken assumption that they need to quit all apps now, just like they used to under iOS 6. And to be perfectly frank, I think that the actual gesture of doing it, bringing that page up and, flicking up your thumb to get rid of the apps is that much more fun. But that's just me.
No, it really is. And to Peter's point, there are apps that you absolutely do want to quit, especially, not so much now, but especially in the beginning, turn-by-turn navigation apps, Skype, anything that had totally unrestricted background access could just keep using battery in the background, and you didn't need them, turn them off. But you never, not ever, have a need to continuously and always empty out the multitasking thing. And doing so, in fact, will stop all those apps from being able to update in the background, which is a behavior that's really convenient and you probably want. Moving on, we also have the new camera and the new Photos app. Richard, my first impression of this new camera app is OMG fast. I mean, you can sit there and literally press the shutter and it will fire over and over again. Even on an iPhone 5, if I hold my finger on the shutter, it'll take 5 pictures in a second. It is blisteringly fast.
It certainly is, and I looked through my camera roll this morning, and I've got so many just duplicate shots because, like you say, I've just held my finger on the shutter button just a little bit too long, and it's just fired off all these photographs. It is so fast. It's kind of for me that's probably the biggest learning curve. Just kind of be gentle with it. Don't hold your finger on the button too long because you're going to end up with a phone full of awful pictures.
Yeah, we've also got square mode, and we've got photo filters, which just goes to show the influence of Instagram on photo culture. But the filters in iOS 7 are nice because they're live, which of course a lot of people are doing. But they're also very subdued. You have 3 black and whites. You have one. You have a couple high contrasts, and then you have one each of yellow, blue, green, blue, green, red tonal filters. They're not going to be for everyone, but I think the subtlety is okay in this instance.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of use Instagram about as much as everybody else, but they are really, really nice, really subtle, as you mentioned. The kind of thing with some of the Instagram filters, they're so horrendously over-processed, you kind of lose what the photograph's about in the first place. And they are kind of fun, and I think the fact that they're live, I really, really like that, because if you're going to do that sort of thing, see what it's going to do to your photograph before you take it. Not, don't take a nice picture and then end up trashing it afterwards. It's kind of a little bit understated, I think, but I think it's the right way to do it. And like you say, they're really nice, subtle, and in the right settings, they can actually enhance your pictures rather than, and give them that kind of really that nice effect, rather than just looking like you've hipstered them for Instagram and Twitter and stuff like that. So
hipsterification. A couple things might be confusing to people who've upgraded for the first time. For example, there's no longer a toggle button for video versus still camera. Now you swipe left to get to the video camera. You swipe right to get to the square camera. You can swipe right again to get to the panoramic camera. The iPhone 5S will have a slow-mo camera as well. Also, you no longer have the options button. HDR is in its place, so you can turn on HDR quickly. But if you want to turn on the grid, for example, you've got to go to the Settings app, which is a bit of a regression if you were someone who liked to refer to the rule of thirds fairly often. The flash is still in the same place. The picture thumbnail is in the same place. The filters has replaced the toggle button. Overall, though, I think the camera is obviously important to Apple. They spend a huge amount of time every keynote talking about it, Richard, and they are very software-centric. I mean, we've seen Samsung and Nokia strap full-on cameras to their phone, but Apple seems really willing and able to tackle that problem on the chipset and software level.
Definitely. I think nothing proved that more than the keynote last week. It's the same megapixel count, but they've improved the quality of the hardware rather than just slapping in a larger sensor. And all the software things as well. Obviously, we haven't got optical image stabilization, but we've got an auto image stabilization, and Apple's trying to do the same thing with the software, and it is obviously really important. So I mean, with the camera presentation is always at least one of the longest sections of any keynote, and it's clear just from using it on an iPhone 5, they put a lot of thought into the camera app. I love the fact that you can just swipe between the different modes. And I think I mentioned on Twitter or something earlier this week, the panorama in particular, for me, I've used on every platform. It still is the best panorama photograph taking app anywhere. It's so slick and so smooth. It's even better in iOS 7, and the quality of the panorama pictures it actually produces are superb compared to anything else. I wouldn't take. I take a lot of panorama shots when I go racing. The kind of casting across the racetrack, and I did a couple at the weekend. One on the iPhone 5 with the iOS 7, and I shot a couple on the Lumia 920 that I had with me as well. And the difference was startling. I wouldn't take that kind of shot with another camera anymore. They've done such a good job with it.
Yeah, and the other thing is they make a lot of the features that Apple is introducing with iOS 7 have been on other cameras and other apps, for a long time. But I've used the HTC One, I've used the Galaxy S4, and they have some great features and some great hardware. But iOS 7 made everything easier to find. I don't even know if a normal person, unless they go to Android Central, for example, would know quickly how to get to a Zoe or how to do a lot of these things. But iOS 7, I mean, I've tested it with several civilians now, and everything is right up front, and that brings me to the new Photos app. Previously, we had this monolithic camera roll that just would never end, and it's nice of Apple to tell us that they've had these problems for 6 years, but they're fixing them now. Tell me that 6 years ago, Apple. But that's neither here nor there. So now what they do is they use all this metadata, and instead of having a tab for places, for example, they use algorithms to sort out and make these logical groups of photos based on time and location. So you have years, which is the entire year's worth of photos, but then you can go into collections, which tries to give you, a fairly large size grouping of photos based on when they were taken and where. And then you have moments, which are even smaller groupings of these collections. And you can even use your thumb on years and collections to sort of hover over it, get a big version of the picture. And I didn't think it would make a difference. I'm still not in love with the way they're presenting all the information, but in terms of usability, it's made photos much easier to find for me.
Absolutely, and it's kind of, for me, I've kind of felt that it's made looking back through my photographs a little bit more enjoyable because, as you mentioned, the camera roll and the boring, the boring old way of organizing it is still there for those people who just want to see everything all at the same time. But I mentioned like going to the racing and stuff, so. Using all that information, I can now scroll through and I can see the photographs I took at the weekend at one racetrack. I go again next weekend. I can filter out the photographs per weekend. I've got stuff from when I've been in Germany at IFA, and it's really nice to see where I've been while I've been doing these things, and these are the photographs I took there. It's kind of it's really enjoyable just to flick through the photographs and see what I've taken and where. It's kind of more like a memory than just, oh, I took this photograph at some point. It kind of stirs the memories of where I've been as well, and for me that's a big part of it. It's all part of the experience.
No, absolutely. And they've got a new share sheet now. The share sheet's been completely remade. You've got Flickr as an option, so you can, if you have a Flickr account, you can quickly share there. But the biggest news, at least for me, is AirDrop. And AirDrop is interesting because people get so upset with Apple for not certain geeks, a faction of geeks gets upset with Apple for not including NFC. But the thing is this, NFC is a chipset and not a feature set. And Apple very rarely, if not never, goes, oh, look, a new chip. How can we add that, and what features can we put on it? What they'll do instead is say, these are the features we want. What technology do we need to support it? And if that technology requires NFC, they'll put it in. If they can do it without it, because for Apple, less is always more, they'll do it without it. And AirDrop is one of those features. It's popular on a lot of platforms to just bump your phone to initiate an NFC transfer for information. Sort of how, like in the old Trio days, you could use infrared, to beam stuff, which seems crazy now, but we did it. What AirDrop does is uses ad hoc Wi-Fi, which is sort of like Wi-Fi Direct. We don't have to be on the same Wi-Fi network. We both have to have Wi-Fi on. But I'll just see Richard in my share sheet, tap his head. The image will be sent to him. He'll be asked if he wants it. If he does, he'll get it, and it'll take him right to the app where it is. And I like that idea, Richard, because Wi-Fi has a really good range, and it has a security model I understand, and it gives me enough control but enough flexibility that I have ended up using it quite often already.
Yeah, I much prefer things that make use of Wi-Fi than Bluetooth. It's so much more reliable, and I mean, I use AirDrop on the Mac constantly. I have two machines at home, and just the simplicity of just being able to drag and drop between two machines, and now we've got some element of that in iOS. It's really, it's fantastic. I mean, it's a shame that it is just iOS to iOS. I think that's just me being who I am and what I would love to do with it. But it's coming.
It's coming. Yeah, it's not ready yet.
It's fingers crossed. But it is a fantastic feature to have. It's something that Mac users have obviously had for so long, and it just makes sharing things so simple. I mean, you mentioned it's funny you mentioned NFC. A couple of weeks ago when I was at IFA in Berlin, we were at one of the events, and one of the PR reps for another company wanted to pass on some contact details by NFC. And the whole process was kind of ridiculous because she was kind of massaging her phone over the back of another NFC phone. It wasn't just bring them together, as you see on the adverts. It wasn't just bring them together, and it happened. They were kind of rubbing the phones together and trying to get it to match up. And that's
like, get a room.
That's no way to do anything. No, I've never really used NFC. I would much prefer something like AirDrop and Wi-Fi technology.
I have a Z10 and I've used a Q10, and I've tried so often to bump to share BBM contacts, and it's never worked. I've always had to scan in the end. And some people are like, well, you can do auto setup or you can do authentication with NFC. You could do the same thing with Bluetooth Low Energy. For example, there's been evidence that Apple's going to be allowing Apple TV to set up based just on your iPhone being close to it, and that's fantastic. I think at the end of the day, Apple's going to be able to do everything they want with Bluetooth Low Energy, Bluetooth 4.0, and they don't need the extra chipset, and that means one less thing to cram into the phone, one less thing to power, and that's a pretty huge win for us.
Definitely. I think people kind of forget that NFC, of what it stands for. It's near field communication. It is literally, you have to have the things practically touching or actually touching. Things like Bluetooth have a much better range, and you mentioned the thing with setting up the Apple TV. If you were doing that with NFC, you would probably have to walk up to your Apple TV, tap the iPhone on it for that to work. Whereas using Bluetooth, theoretically, you can just be anywhere within proximity and do exactly the same thing. So it's for me at least, it's a much better technology. NFC doesn't really transfer anything. So even Android Beam, you use the NFC to instigate the transfer, but then everything transfers over Bluetooth. So NFC is being, for me at least, it's being used in all the wrong ways. Credit cards and things like that, contactless payments. For me, that's how NFC should be used. If I'm not using it to pay for something, like I do with my credit card, I'm not. There's no other use for it for me.
Craig Johnson in the chat room is raising another interesting point, and that is that we have a lot of siloed technologies right now, and that is one thing that I lament. For example, it's not clear that I'd ever be able to airdrop something to someone using an Android or BlackBerry or Windows phone. It's not clear I'd be able to S-beam something from Samsung to another device. And there's all these technologies that we're getting FaceTime audio, from a variety of vendors that just don't work with each other. I don't even know if the Galaxy Gear, for example, will work with a non-Samsung phone, and that's great because it enhances the value of their ecosystem. But for me, I keep saying I love proprietary interfaces because they're always the better solution, but I prefer open standards-based communication protocols because I want to be able to send my data to everywhere, just like email or SMS, stuff like that. So hopefully, especially when we get into stuff like iBeacons, which is another huge advantage we'll get to in a minute. Before we go to that, though, I'm going to stop off in Safari land for a minute. We talked about the new gestures in Safari. Safari has never been faster, and both Nitro and WebKit seem significantly improved to me. One of the biggest advantages that I like in the new version, we talked about the deference already. When you start scrolling, it minimizes the new universal search bar. Let me ask you about that first, Richard. I've never been a big fan of universal search and location bars. I like the idea that I could type in a web address and Google would never see it. I didn't like the idea that if I typed in a web address, they would see every website I was going to by virtue of it parsing through a search engine. But everyone has gone that way now. Safari is that way. Firefox is that way. Chrome's that way. This is the world I have to live in, right?
Definitely, it's just the modern world. It's just how it is. I mean, I understand what you're saying about it, and I understand what that kind of point of view. I love it. I've been living in Chrome on the desktop for so long now. I can't even remember anything else. But having everything in one bar. It's because under iOS 6, out of force of habit, be it from using desktop or Android phones or whatever, I would always go into the web address bar and I'd type in a search and it just wouldn't do anything.
Yeah, me too.
I could see the bar next to it, but it just didn't. It didn't click in my head that I still needed to go into that one. So I mean, for me, it'll stop me making such ridiculously stupid mistakes at least. But it's a nice touch to have. I think it's just Apple, like I say, catching up on the mobile with a feature that everybody's going with. So it's almost expected at this point, I would think.
And it's well done. I mean, you start typing in there. Immediately when you start typing, you're presented with a grid of favorites. They could be folders, they could be websites. But if you want to access one, just tap it and you go. Otherwise, as you type, you'll get the top hit. The basic search engine is still Google. You'll get a set of Google search results, and at the very bottom you'll get a set of results from the current page that you're on. So if you want to find the word, so if you type in iPhone, for example, the top hit might be iMore. The Google search might show you a bunch of iPhone results, and then at the bottom you'll get a list of how many times the word iPhone appears in your page, and you just tap that and you go. So it's really all your search in one place. And one of my favorite things is that on this universal search interface, on the tabs interface, and on the bookmarks interface, private browsing is right there. You used to have to go to settings and turn on private browsing. And whether you're using it to look at adult web content, we don't judge, or you just don't want ads tracking you when you go from website to website, especially if you're dealing with financial information, it's so much more convenient to be able to toggle that right then and there.
Absolutely, it's always been a pain having to go out to the settings app just to do something so simple. But I mean, you mentioned on the search and stuff, it's exactly what I would want it to be. Just as I prefer Chrome just generally as a browser because I use it in most other places. But I always come back to Safari on the iPhone because you can't default another browser. But the changes that have come with iOS 7 makes me want to use Safari as the default browser on my iPhone rather than just making do with it. I always felt kind of restricted before, but it's just brilliant now. Like I say, being able to find words and top search hits and all just from typing in just in that one bar. I don't want to say it's how it should be, but I mean for me, just for my use case, it just makes me want to use Safari, and it's a really, really nicely well done job. I'm very impressed with it. Very impressed.
And a pro tip, I mean, some people have said, it's annoying that you have to scroll back up to get the search bar and the controls to reappear, because when you scroll down, they disappear. If you just tap the area where the web title is, if you just tap the smart search field, that'll increase in size, and the buttons at the bottom will pop back up no matter where you are. So it's just a faster way of getting those. The new bookmarks are great too, because you have not only bookmarks like you used to have, and reading list, which has gotten a much improved interface, but also there's a little @ symbol, and if you hit that, you'll see links pulled out of your Twitter feed. If you have Twitter integrated with iOS 7, I mean, like if you've logged into Twitter in iOS 7 settings, all the links that people post in Twitter are just there. And the best thing of all, Richard, is when you start reading reading list or the shared links, you can just keep scrolling. It'll load the next link automatically. You don't have to go back and forth anymore.
Absolutely, and I think it's the same for Mavericks. I think when that finally drops, that's brilliant. The whole point of a reading list is that you've got stuff that you just want to read, and you just want to read and keep reading, and the fact that it will just keep on presenting that stuff to you. I mean, it's such a simple little thing to do, but it just makes it so much more of a better experience than having to go and find your own stuff. I mean, I don't know whether I'm just lazy, but I really like the fact that all this stuff is just being presented to me, just as as I'm going to want it. It's good for a lazy man like myself, definitely.
The last thing I want to touch on, actually, there's a couple more things I want to touch on. One is the Rolodex. So you used to have the Safari Pages view, which is now used for multitasking, but you have this new, and I didn't think it'd be controversial, but it is. When you go to tabs, you're given a 3D Rolodex of all your tabs, and you can really quickly flick through them. You can use the parallax to peep into them. You can touch them, drag them around. You can throw them away, like you can throw multitasking cards away. And if you keep scrolling, you get your iCloud tabs, which shows you every website you have open on all your other iOS devices and all your other Macs. And I'll throw this to Peter because he has very kindly rejoined us. Peter, what do you think about the new tabs implementation and maybe Safari in general?
I think the controversy over it is kind of weird, actually. Again, it comes back to what I thought was a pretty intuitive interface, but a lot of people don't agree. A lot of people find it jarring. Some people have been asking me, how do I make this not happen anymore?
How do I turn it off?
Exactly.
I understand, like, you can have unlimited tabs now. Previously, there was a restriction on the tabs. I think it was 8 in the last version of iOS, and now you can have unlimited tabs, which can mean you're scrolling for a long time. But I think the advantages greatly overwhelm any disadvantages. The last thing I want to touch on, and I'm eager for your opinion here, Peter, is that they told us all about iCloud Keychain at WWDC, and it was in the betas. It's not in the shipping version, apparently. I mean, I've seen it occasionally, but it doesn't appear to be consistently in the shipping version of iOS 7. Do you think that Apple is holding back on it, or do you think that it's going to ship when Mavericks does so that you can actually sync across platforms?
That's my expectation. My expectation is that they're holding back iCloud Keychain until it goes, or until Mavericks is there. What I'm expecting is that Apple is going to release an operating system, an iOS update at the same time that Mavericks drops that's going to enable iCloud Keychain. I could be wrong, though, but that's my guess.
So, I mean, there's so much more to talk about, but I don't want us to run too long. I've tried FaceTime audio, and again, this is controversial. People are like, oh, you mean a phone call? Haha. But you could say the same thing about iMessage. It's just an SMS message, but it obviates the carrier. And I've tried it. I've called people in the U.S. I've called people internationally. The voice quality is amazing. People actually sound like people. It's not always perfect. I mean, Skype, nothing is always perfect. But FaceTime audio, and also I should say it's restricted to Wi-Fi right now because carriers are jerks, self-protecting jerks, but still jerks. I think FaceTime audio is great, and especially the way they've integrated it into the phone app makes it an equal citizen with carrier-based calling.
It would be nice to see carriers reduced to a diminished level from where they are now when it comes to actually using your phone for things like interpersonal communication. You know, iMessage was a huge shot across the bow as far as that was concerned. But, you know, iMessage breeds some confusion, too. You know, every so often I'll get questions from people who don't understand that, you know, their friend or their family member who's got an iPhone, you know, why can I do this with them, but I can't do it with somebody who's not using an iPhone? It gets a little confusing sometimes in the way that messages works with contacts and so on. You know, the thing that about FaceTime audio chats that I guess kind of make me wonder whether or not people are going to use it that much is that it's a system that's not familiar to them. You know, I mean, it's really intuitive to pick up your phone, click on the phone or tap on the phone icon and dial and make a call. Doing it through FaceTime, either through your contacts list or whatever, is not necessarily as intuitive. And, you know, that makes me think that it's going to be relegated to sort of a novelty more than a core feature.
No, I don't disagree with that. One of the things that I think is also really great is you can now block people from calling you, FaceTiming you, or messaging you. It only works on iOS 7 devices, obviously, so if you have a flip phone instead of an iPhone, it'll block it on your iOS devices, but not your flip phone. But I like this feature because there's so many ways to contact people now, and I've had fax machines calling me over and over again. I've had Rogers service reps, like people trying to upsell me my Rogers contract, literally calling me 6 times a day. I'm going to get so much use dropping the block bomb on these people that I literally can't wait to use it now.
It's good, isn't it?
You know, it's funny. I was joking earlier that I really wish that there was a block with extreme prejudice button that would automatically initiate a drone strike against whoever it was that you were blocking. I wish it's kind of serious though. I mean, I get a lot of calls on my landline still. I need to keep my landline because cell reception in my house is kind of crappy. And boy, I wish I could use an easy call blocking feature on that. But you know, I can, but the hoops I have to jump through are a little much. It's so much easier in iOS 7.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. There's a couple questions in the chat room. Redshirt wants to know about what happened with FaceTime being cross-platform. And the last I heard, Apple was sued by a patent troll, and they fought it, they lost, they fought, they appealed, they lost, and now they're having to re-architect FaceTime so that it goes through a relay server, and they still haven't gotten a resolution to either the lawsuit or to that, and it's made FaceTime, frankly, a worse service because instead of things being direct, previously Apple would negotiate the service, hand it off to the devices, and I would just be talking to Peter, just be talking to Richard, and now to get around the lawsuit, they have to make it go through a central server, and you know, servers are hard, and it makes the process complicated, and it makes me think that no one else, that Apple won't supply it openly because anyone else would get sued or have to use Apple's relay servers, and it's frankly a mess. So, you know, this is why we can't have nice internet things.
Patent trolls.
Instead, we have to have Skype.
All I can say about patent trolls is block with extreme prejudice.
So the last thing I want to ask you guys about, because it's really interesting to me, is, Peter, we've also heard about made-for-iPhone game controllers, and we've got these things called iBeacon. So iOS 7 also enables all these great new accessories. So, for example, Logitech now, but you know, in my wildest dreams, Nintendo could make a game controller. I could walk into my house, drop my iPhone on the table, AirPlay it to my TV, pick up my made-for-iPhone game controller, and do what consoles were doing, you know, maybe in terms of quality 5 years ago, and that's incredibly exciting to me.
Yeah, there's nothing like having a phone that's as good as a last generation console. I don't know. MFI is definitely a cool technology. We'll see what the peripheral developers do with it, though. My experience with games that support AirPlay has been that it's not a perfect technology. It's great for spectation. It's great if you actually want to watch somebody play a game on the TV, but the actual gameplay experience itself is really laggy unless you've got a direct connection to the TV. So I'm not really sold on hooking up my iPhone to, or having a great game controller and streaming it to AirPlay and playing stuff on the TV. I'm not sold on that yet, but I am happy to see Apple accept that some game experiences on iOS devices may be improved through the use of of actual game controllers rather than having to use virtual game interfaces on the device itself. You know, we can only have so many swipe to hack and slash type games before things get a little bit stale. And let's face it, it's a kludge when you see a game that may be ported from another platform or may have been designed with another system in mind, ported to the iOS platform, only to see virtual controls on it that, you know, muck up the screen, and it's not a graceful way to do it. So glad that Apple's doing that.
No, absolutely, and you know, everyone's best friend Guy English, who worked in the gaming industry for a long time, said that the games you get tend to fill out the feature set of the controls that you have. The experience will match the control scheme, and that's why, you know, you could have Halo on Xbox, or you could have GoldenEye, or, you know, Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64, and hopefully this just gives another option so we get rounder, better games. iBeacons also are really interesting to me because, again, you talk about an NFC negating technology. You can get these small, cheap devices, and you could put them places. So, for example, you could navigate through a building. Your first day at work, your phone will just tell you where to go. If you're blind and you go to a national park, your phone could give you a tour. Eventually, it could work for, you know, e-commerce. And, Richard, that's one of the things that I really like, and I can imagine that being one of those Tim Cook WWDC videos where he shows, you know, a bunch of people with accessibility issues or any sort of navigational problem just using iBeacons to achieve things they never could before.
Definitely, it's a really exciting prospect, and I think because it's got kind of Apple's power behind it, we might see more of a chance of it taking off than perhaps if another Android manufacturer, for example, had tried to do it. The whole kind of automation thing. I mean, even I don't have accessibility issues, but the whole kind of automation aspect of it to me is really exciting. The fact that I could go into my front room, do nothing, and the lights just come on because I've got my phone in my pocket, go off when I leave because I always forget to turn the lights off. It's just even just simple things like that. It's like the nerd's home of the future sort of thing. Yeah, it's going to be a ways off. It's going to be a ways off, but it's really exciting stuff.
So I was so excited when I first heard about iBeacon because I thought it was iBacon, and then I found out that it had nothing to do with bacon whatsoever, and it kind of bummed me out.
Maybe you can get bacon-flavored beacons.
Ooh.
Walk into the kitchen and it starts making bacon for you.
That would be awesome.
I want to get to everyone's recommendations here, and I'll go first. I've been using iOS 7 since it came out on beta. I've had it on all my major devices all of the time. It is, in my opinion, brilliant. I'll get to my final thoughts in a minute, but it's definitely messy. Like it's the beginning of something really exciting, but it's not finished yet. And there's all sorts of inconsistencies, and there are legitimate issues, especially on lower end devices. I've had nothing but fantastic battery life and performance on an iPhone 5, an iPad 4, and even the iPad Mini, which is the equivalent of an iPad 2. But an iPad 3, thanks to that Apple A5X graphics processor, isn't great. An iPhone 4 isn't great. Any first generation Retina device really isn't great because the Retina tax was so high on those devices. So I would tell everybody unequivocally to update to iOS 7. If you have an iPhone 4 or an iPad 3, you're probably still going to want to update because the most important thing about updating is you get access to iOS 7 apps. It's binary compatibility, but it's not the best experience in the world, and you might want to actually consider upgrading your hardware this year or next year. I know Peter has some amazing thoughts on this, but I want to go to Richard first so we can tease out Peter's thoughts for a second. What's your advice, Richard?
I would absolutely update. I mean, like you, I've been using some of the earlier builds, and I've kind of grown with it. I'm kind of a little bit disappointed with it on the iPad 4. I don't know whether it's just me or I've got just stuff happening, but it doesn't feel as slick all around on the iPad 4 as it does on the iPhone 5, which is really weird. There's been instances where I've been going between sort of folders and apps, and things just don't feel as kind of fluid and as slick. So. Definitely, I mean, it's not a bad experience by any means. Just obviously bear that in mind. My kind of biggest pet peeve with it, if you like, is that the iOS 7 keyboard isn't system wide. So you've got effectively two keyboards, because if you've got a load of apps that haven't been updated for iOS 7 specifically, Tweetbot is the biggest example for me, because it's something I use pretty much every 10 minutes. It still has the iOS 6 keyboard.
Developers have to manually enable the iOS 7 keyboard.
And that frustrates me. There's bound to be a technical reason for it. It's just, like, from my perspective, because I use Android devices where you can change the keyboard to something you download from the Play Store and it'll just work with everything. It irritates me probably more than it should do, but there are some little inconsistencies that folks should look out for. Nothing's broken, but there are some little sort of quirks that are still present.
I will point out that a lot of people report initially bad performance and bad battery life, and it looks like there's a lot of stuff going on when you first install it. Maybe Spotlight is re-indexing everything on the system. Maybe it's converting libraries. I'm not sure. We're looking into it, but it looks like the first 24 hours is more painful as a bunch of stuff sorts itself out, and then almost everyone who's complained initially has come back and said, I woke up and now it's fantastic and I don't know why. So I would say give it a day before you start to worry a lot about it. All right, Peter, you wrote one of the most popularly controversial articles we've had up in a long time, where you basically, I don't know what the right word is, you warned people?
Yeah, I cautioned people to think twice about installing iOS 7 on day one. Some people took this as a blanket condemnation of iOS 7. It wasn't. Unlike the two of you, I have not been using iOS 7 throughout the beta period. I'm a relatively new convert to it. And, my experience has been that despite their best efforts, many developers have not updated their applications to suit iOS 7's new design language, and quite frankly, I think that experience is jarring. I had a lot of developers take issue with me, going, "My application works exactly the same or looks exactly the same under iOS 7 as it did under iOS 6." Yes, and that's the point.
How dare you, sir? How dare you?
Right, exactly, and that is the point. You may not like what Apple's doing with iOS 7, but it is the new boss. You're going to have to adapt to it sooner or later. So, what you were just talking about, Richard, with how the iOS 7 keyboard isn't system wide; it's only in the applications that have been updated for it. That's a practical example. So you get this kind of jarring inconsistency of interface that I find problematic. And there are other really good reasons to wait. I mean, no major operating system update from Apple or from anybody else is ever perfect. It may very well suit you better to wait for a point update. This especially goes for people who have edge case machines, like Renee, you were just talking about with the iPhone 4 and the iPad 3. I wish I'd waited on my iPad 3 because my user experience with that device is definitely diminished. I'm hoping that there are optimizations that Apple can employ in like a 7.01 or 7.02 update for these devices, but I'm not holding my breath. I think that that 2011 timeframe was really sort of the line in the sand that Apple had to draw to say, okay, this is the earliest that we can support, and even then, So there are other practical considerations as well. Once you upgrade to iOS 7, you can't downgrade to iOS 6. So if you upgrade and you change your mind, sorry, buddy, you're screwed. I'm overstating it a bit. There are ways that you could possibly do it, but
if you're technically efficient, yeah, you can follow one of Ali's tutorials.
Right, exactly. But this is not something I would recommend for muggles. So I think that there are a lot of good reasons to wait and a lot of good reasons to upgrade. If you need if you need access to the new features and services of iOS 7, absolutely update. If you're absolutely certain that all of your apps and all of the services that you're working with are going to work right out of the box with iOS 7, then absolutely update if you've got a machine that can handle it. Otherwise, it may pay to be circumspect and let other people fall on that sword of the bleeding edge for a little bit, and just take a back seat and see what happens. I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen outside of you don't have the new shiny thing to show off your friends?
Peter will get it before me.
Exactly.
All right, so I'm going to go around the room and get your final thoughts. And I just want to point out again, we put up a ton of content. So, and we're going to keep going throughout the weekend. So all you have to do is go to imore.com/iOS-7, or just go to the homepage, imore.com, and we will help you with anything you could possibly need help with and give you information on anything you could possibly imagine. The team totally killed it. I'm so proud of everybody. It's amazing. Peter, what's your sort of summation? What do you think now as an iOS 7 user? And I want to point out, iOS 2.0, iOS 3.0, iOS 4.0, really big issues launch day. iOS 6 was fairly smooth. iOS 7, I think, has been fairly smooth, but Apple was before yesterday, the oldest. As soon as BlackBerry 10 launched, they were the oldest major mobile operating system on the market. They had to do something to sort of regain the relevancy standard. How does iOS 7 match up for you?
iOS 7 is a spectacular update. It makes devices that are running it feel like completely new devices. It's a lot of fun to experiment with it and to sort of discover new features and functionality that you didn't know existed. We posted some, other sites have posted some of these hints for, hey, settings that you didn't know about or things that you didn't know about with iOS 7. Apple has left a lot of Easter eggs here for us to discover, and it's part of the joy of updating is getting a chance to find those things. So I'm very impressed with it. But I do think, as you said before, Renee, that it's a work in progress and that it's going to take Apple a little bit of time to work out all the kinks before it is as smoothly polished a gem as it could be.
Richard, you have big gadget love in your heart. You have Android and Windows phones and BlackBerries. How does iOS 7 stack up for you?
It's a pretty spectacular update. I think one of the biggest things I can take from it is it makes the iPhone 5 feel like a brand new phone. It's a year old, but it feels like a brand new device with this software on it. And I think for a lot of people that maybe can't afford to, or are stuck in contracts that can't upgrade to the 5S, I think iOS 7 is probably more than the release of a new phone. I think it's a much more important release for us this year. One of my friends joked that iOS release day is the day that regular smartphone users care about software updates, because in the Android world, software updates must have them straight away. It's the big thing, but iOS brings it to the masses, and a lot of my friends and a lot of people I follow on Twitter, and there's been, from what I can see, universal praise. And I think the most exciting thing for me is some of the apps that have already come out that are iOS 7 updated. There are some spectacular apps. Even like the eBay app, for example, it just looks amazing. It works superbly, and I think that's going to be where one of the areas we really, really benefit, when developers are fully behind it and they're using all the cool stuff and they're making all these apps that fit within the design language. I mean, we're in for a treat. It's really, really early days, but it's looking so good for the future.
Yeah, I agree with you. A couple of months ago, I did a podcast with Guy English and Mark Edwards of Bajango and Lauren Brichter, who did Tweety and Letterpress, all about the future of human interface and what we wanted to see going forwards. And I did an article just right before WWDC with some of the stuff that I heard about, what could possibly be next. The iPhone announcement, the original one by Steve Jobs in 2007, it blew me away. I've been a smartphone user for years, and I'd never seen anything like that. And then, I quite enjoyed a lot of the stuff I saw with Android, but it was WebOS in 2009 at CES. Also blew me away. And I haven't had that experience since then. I was always wondering, what's next? Apple made the command line popular with the Apple II, the GUI popular with the Mac. They made multi-touch popular with the iPhone. It was Siri is starting to make natural language, but it wasn't clear to me what was next. And then when I saw iOS 7 and I saw how they used the physics and the particle engine and how they were bringing the gestures into it, and they were making the operating system an object that was so playful that it was, it was instinctive enough that it gave you delight when you used it, and it was playful enough that you could discover so much things on your own. And it made me think that, finally, this is it. This is what's next. And I think iOS 7 is as important to Apple now as the original iOS was in 2007. And when you put it together with the M7 chip and you put it together with the Apple A7, this is Apple sort of bending their legs and getting ready to jump forward again with their next generation stuff. And I'm much happier with it than I thought it was going to be. I had a lot more trepidations before WWDC, some lingering ones after, but I think Apple and their team did a fantastic job, and I want to thank them on behalf of all of us, certainly, for they literally put in 24-hour days, and they did not have weekends, and it was a Herculean effort. And I want to thank everybody from all of the teams for doing all this, because you delivered software to hundreds of millions of people in one day. Granted, you damn near broke the internet in half to do it, but you did it, and that is a Herculean task. All that being said, Peter, where can people find out more about you, and where can they read your incredibly controversial articles?
iMore.com, loopinsight.com, and on Twitter at Flarg, Flargh.
And Richard Devine, you, sir?
On iMore.com every day, obviously, and on Twitter at Ricker666, but I'm more often found on Google+, where you just search for my name.
Richard Devine. You can find me at Rene Ritchie on all the social things, Twitter, Instagram, app.net. You can find me at iMore.com. You can find all of us at mobilenations.com. That's for all of our shows. Everyone out there updating to iOS 7, hit iMore. We are more than happy to help. Our forums are answering all of your questions, forums.imore.com. If you need anything else, just leave a comment on this podcast and let us know what you think of iOS 7, how long you've been running it for, what your impressions are, what you love the most and what you hate the most. We'd love to hear your questions. We'd love to get your opinions, and we will use them on a future show. I'm off to line up for the new iPhone. Richard is off to cross some Thames and pull an Excalibur out of a rock. Peter has to find a cod to cape or something, and we'll be back next week with new phones. Thanks, everybody.